Welcome to this brand new Flutter course. In this video, you're going to be learning how to install Flutter and use Flutter to create applications. Flutter is a declarative framework by Google for building natively compiled applications from one programming language, or you can say from a single code base. It also supports cross-platform development on iOS, Windows, Mac, Linux, and also the web browser. One more benefit of this video is that you'll also be learning how to use Firebase with Flutter. Firebase is a back-end service. It provides developers with a variety of tools and services to help them develop quality apps. So if you don't want to develop your own back-end, you can use Firebase as a back-end service. So these are the key features of Firebase. We have authentication, real-time database for real-time results. We also have hosting to help you scale your application and also gives you notification. All our design in these tutorials are going to be done with Dart. Dart is a programming language, client optimized language for fast applications on any platform and is optimized for building user interfaces. Dart also supports productive development, which features hot reload. That is also similar to JavaScript and Kotlin codes in the aspect of object-oriented programming. So if you are familiar with classes, you get to see the same thing on Dart as well. So this is a very good example of that. So widgets are a collection of visual, structural platform, and also interactive widgets. So in that we get to know types of widget like the stateful widget and also stateless widgets, which we're going to be talking about in some couple of seconds. But this is a very good example of a Dart programming language. It kind of helps us to design the UI of our Flutter applications. So these are types of Flutter widgets. Like I say, we have the stateless widget and also the stateful widget. So Flutter has these two types of widgets. So this example of stateless widget, we get to see containers, text, button, all those kind of widgets. Then for the stateful widgets, we have the text field, form, slider. They are kind of dynamic in nature, which means we can actually change things and it's going to render faster for us. Then for us to write a Flutter application on our machine, we must have Android Studio installed in our Windows PC and also make sure we have the Visual Studio Code extension installed inside the Visual Studio Code editor. So same thing you are doing for Windows operating system is the same thing you are doing for Mac OS, except that you are using Xcode. So you get to install the VS Code extension as well. So guys, welcome to this tutorial. Please, before you proceed, I like you to hit that like button and also the subscribe button, and let's dive in and start developing using Flutter. We're going to be working on a full stack authentication application in this tutorial, which is going to allow a user to sign up as well as sign in. And we're going to add what is called Redux state management to actually help us to switch through our login and also our sign up form. So when I click on login, you kind of see the effect. We're going to use that for design, then Redux state management, and also Firebase for the backend service. So it's going to be a full stack application. So if you're new to Flutter, this tutorial is perfectly for you because you're going to be learning a lot. So do not forget to hit that like button and also the subscribe button, and let's begin with. In order for us to use Flutter on our PC or on our machine, we have to come over to the official website and follow the documentation process for installing Flutter on your PC. I'm going to click on Get Started, and it's going to take us to the install page where we are going to see how to install it for different operating systems. And I'm going to click on Windows. If you're on Mac OS, I expect you click on Mac OS, or if you're on Linux, I expect you click on Linux as well. So whenever the page loads for Windows, you're going to see the installation process. Just go ahead and read through, and the very most important thing there is that you have to get the Flutter SDK downloaded. It's just a zip file. You have to download that and extract that to a path on your PC. I already did that, and I'm going to show you the next thing to do is to update your environment variables. Just click environment variables, user variable, and then click on path. I'm just going to type down environment variables here. I'm going to click on environment variables, and then under user variables, you could see user variables here. You can just click on edit, and you can see where I added the specific path for that Flutter SDK on my PC. So I just added that there on that part and click OK. So there are some things that they put down there in order for you to know that this was done perfectly. You have to open your commander or your git bash, anyone. And if you are always used to my videos, you know I use commander a lot. So I'm just gonna type down where Flutter, and it's gonna show us the path that Flutter is installed. So let me kind of minimize this. This is a long text. Okay, this is just where, so that's where Flutter. So let me clear that and hit enter. So it's gonna show us where our Flutter is currently, our Flutter SDK is currently on our PC, or we can also type with Flutter to get that path. Sorry for that again, with Flutter to get that path directly. So this is the path directly on our commander. So I'm just gonna clear that. So for Android Studio setup, just go ahead and install your Android Studio. Make sure you configure everything a PC needs in order to recognize Android VRM to run Android apps or Android emulator on your PC. Very simple for you to do as well. So you just go ahead and read through to see how to do that, which is very, very simple. While I was showing you the demo application we are going to be working on, you could realize that I opened the application on a Chrome browser, which means we are going to be working on Flutter Web in this tutorial. So this tutorial is going to be a web-centric, but that doesn't limit it that it's not going to work on any device. You just go ahead and make some couple little changes where necessary, but it's going to work perfectly the way it is also. I'm going to switch over to the folder I want to use. So I'm going to switch over to my YouTube tutorial. I'm going to create a Flutter project. So we're going to call this one authentication, or let's just say Flutter auth, and I'm going to hit enter, and we're going to allow this to run through to grab the necessary dependencies for us to use in our Flutter application. So it's kind of not allowing us to give that space there, so I'm just going to join that together and hit enter. And you can see it doesn't even take time to do that. And the next thing is to switch over to that Flutter auth folder, and then we can use the Flutter run to run our application, so which I'm gonna do quickly, and that's gonna run our application for us. So while running, it's gonna ask us to select the couple of options we have. So since we are not running on Android emulator or any simulator, we are just gonna click on Windows if we want, but I want this to be on a web, so I'm just gonna select to use the Chrome browser to run this application for us. And once that is done, it's gonna open a standalone page for us to use our Flutter app on, and it's gonna assign a link to that as well. So there's a link there, and you can see we have this Flutter dummy project. So I can click on this so that you can actually see how this reflects on the screen. So this is showing us that our application is running perfectly. So guys, if you've come this far, please do not forget to like and also subscribe to the YouTube channel. And the next thing I'm going to do is to open up the project on our desired IDE. So one thing I should do before we proceed is to show you guys how to run the Flutter project in case your app got terminated. So you just type down Flutter run inside the project folder, and it's going to recompile that again. So right now we have our application project open on our desired IDE. So let me just go through some couple of things here before we go ahead and install the dependencies, and then we can go through some couple of widgets and then start working on our applications. So right here you could see the constructor, which is actually being running here using the Flutter Run app, and it's going to extend my app extends to a stateless widget, so we just renders once, like I said. So inside here you can see there are some other things which are very necessary with the material app design, which help us to use the material design UI for our Flutter application. And right here you could see the ThemeData, which is kind of a compatible mode for any device screen that we are using our app on. And then we have the title. Right here we're using a stateful widget, and we can actually dynamically pass things to a stateful widget. So right here you could see how we did that. So this is just a code for the dummy project which we saw earlier for a button counter increment, which is very simple. Of course, we are going to do something more complicated than this. So I'm going to clear everything that is not necessary. So right here, we're using the Dart UI to render our UI. And inside here, we have a scaffold, which kind of contains the scaffold of the stack of things we are going to be putting inside there. We have the app bar. The app bar contains the title. We can also customize our title. Then we have the body. The body kind of accepts containers, center, columns, and all those blah 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 widgets. Then we have the floating button. Of course, if you're coming from React Native, you kind of understand what this means. So this is very simple application, and let's see if our application actually is running. So I'm just gonna hit 2. So our application is running perfectly, and if you want to refresh the application on your commander, just hit the arrow, or on your git bash is going to automatically restart or refresh the application for you. So that's like a hot restart. And inside our application, I'm gonna clear all the codes that I don't need. I don't need this, and I'm just gonna use my hand and create my own stateful and stateless widgets. Before we proceed to work on our application, let's just do some basic things with Flutter. And inside this home, I'm gonna add a container right here, and the container is gonna have a child. So in this child, I just wanna add a column, so we can add as many widgets as we want. So a column is gonna have children, and that children is an array, and then we can add as many let's say as many text widgets that we want, or as many widgets that we want. So usually add a const there. Then we can also do something like add the type of widgets over there. So if I go ahead and save this and kind of refresh our application, let's kind of open here, you could see we get that text widget rendered for us. So that's how we can use Flutter. So if you're working on, like, let's say mobile devices, this is not a very good conventional way of doing things. You can just simply change this to scaffold. Or the best thing you can do as well is to make sure you use the safe area widget, which kind of gives you some reasonable space against your, I think the bar at the top. I can't recall that right now, but I think you should understand me. Then inside here, you're gonna have a child. Then you can add a scaffold. So I think we can just get rid of this child and just make use of that one. So this kind of makes more sense. Then right here, we can add a container, and let me kind of say I want this container to have a height of 80.0, a width as well of 80.0, and then we are going to have a child. Then this child is going to contain the same text, so I'm just going to add a const in front of that. And I think right here, let's just get rid of this. So if you're working with VS Code, you kind of get a very good linter, but for some reason, if I use it together with this tutorial on my machine, it's gonna like affect it. So I'm just sticking with Atom for now, and I'm very sure everything still works perfectly. So let's kind of save. And one more thing before we refresh, I think I should add a color. So let's say colors.blue. So let's just kind of see the result we're gonna have on our screen. I'm just gonna refresh that and then check back here. So we kind of get that text rendered inside that container. So let me kind of space this container out. I'm just gonna give it a 180. And remember, we are inside a column widget, which means we can add as many widgets as we want, because it's just like a stack of widget, but displays it vertically, which is very nice for us. Let's say we want to reduce the text size of this profile photo that we just added in the text. So to do that, we are going to add something called style. And inside here, so let me just break this down. I think it's better. So we can add a style. Then we can add the text style. And inside this text style is going to contain some other props like font size and font family, blah, 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 with all the props that it comes with default. Then this font size is going to be like 15.0, and I want to add a font family. So from font family, I'm just going to specify a Poppins font right here. So for us to use custom fonts, it's very simple. All we simply have to do is to come over to our root folder, and then I'm going to create another folder called assets. And inside that asset folder, I'm going to create two more folders. The first one is going to be a font folder, and the second one is going to be an image folder. So let's say images folder. So this is where we are going to be putting our assets. So for the font, all I will simply do is I kind of like to use Commander, but we can actually review this, let's say show in File Explorer, and I'm going to copy a font that I already kept. So I kept Poppins and I'm going to paste that inside fonts. So our font is added, and in order for us to make use of that, we have to make sure our .dat file, our .dat script recognizes that. So just come over to this popspec.yaml file and scroll down. Right here, this is where we are going to be adding our dependencies for our project very soon or shortly. Then just scroll down here, you're going to see how to add images. So for now, I just want to focus on the fonts. I can just uncomment this. Then right here, we are using the Poppins fonts. So the path to the font is inside assets. So let's kind of rename this to Poppins, and in front of that font, we just have to add assets. So I'm not going to use all the fonts styles there. So I'm just going to select the ones that are very important. So the first one here is let's get rid of this, and let's copy this as well. Sorry for that. So I didn't copy that perfectly. The first one is Poppins bold, and it's gonna have a weight. Say a weight of 700. So this one is gonna have a weight of 300 because we're gonna be using Poppins regular. So that's how we can actually use fonts. And then whenever I want to just use font, we just have to make reference of the name of the font inside our project, and it's going to automatically use this font for us. So before we leave this popspec file, I think it's best that we also make sure that our application can also use images. So I just have to uncomment that, and because we are not going to be using a specific image, we are going to just use access/images. So this kind of shows you how to use a specific image you want to use. So that's how we can actually add font and assets. So sometimes it's good that you uncomment, it's good that you remove the comments that are not necessary for your application. So the next thing we can do is to use images. So let's say we want to apply a background image or an image to this container. The way we can do that is to come over to this container widget, and then I want us to do it beneath the style. So let's just add a decoration and scroll a little bit up. So inside this decoration, we are gonna have the box. Let's use the box decoration, and then let's kind of give this a border because I want us to see the edges. So I'm gonna use border.all. Let's use a color of colors.black, and let's give the border a width of 3. Then for us to use the image, let's come down here and type down the image. Then we are going to use a widget called decoration image. So with the help of decoration image, we can specify the path of an image using the assets image widget, which is going to make reference to the path that the image is. So let's call logo.png, and right here we want the image to fit in our box. We can use the fit, then we can use boxfit.cover. So if you're using Visual Studio Code, you'll kind of get the recommendations for how you can actually fit an image. So that's how we can do that, and let's kind of refresh our application and see the results. So when I try to refresh that, we kind of get the error coming from the popspec file. So just scroll a little bit down and let's reopen that and scroll down. I think I use 2 keys, which are fonts. Yeah, exactly. So we can clear that out. So we are just using 2 fonts, and we are not trying to use multiple fonts there. So let's try to refresh again and see if we will get an error. And we kind of got an error talking about no name parameters for decoration. That's because right here we are making use of the text. So just go ahead and remove 1 parenthesis from here. So that should fix it. And also for the text style, I want to get rid of this const because we don't need that. So let's save that and refresh. So let's quickly open our browser to see the effect. So that kind of shows us the image that we are using. So right here you could see the image showing perfectly and also the text showing perfectly. So this kind of how we can use image as a background in our Flutter application, which is very simple. The next thing we are going to do is to go over to the screens folder. I created 2 files. So if you check here, you could see we have 2 files, the login file and also the register file. So inside these files, we are going to be creating our stateful widget. I'm going to start off with the login file. The way we can create a stateful widget is very simple. Right here, we are going to create a login class, and also we are going to create a stateful login class. So let me just call this one login state. And this login state is going to extend the state of the login class. Then right here, the login itself is going to extend, so we don't need this parentheses. It's going to extend the stateful widget. So usually when you do that, you have to add something like a mini constructor to the stateless widget itself. So the way we can do that is to add something called key. So by default, it should be there for you if you're using something like Visual Studio Code. So I just want this tutorial to be plain so that everyone can understand it. That's why I'm using Atom. Then we have to add the override here. So we want to override some lifecycle methods. So we have the create state. So we want the create state to make use of the login state. So our login state is down here, which is our stateful widget. So if we want to use dynamic data, we can pass in dynamic data, and then we can do whatever we want to do with that data in our stateful widget. So for us to display anything, we have to override the widget, which is going to have a build of build context, and then we pass in our context. So I'm not gonna waste time doing this again. I think you should understand it right now. Then right here we are gonna return, let's say we want to return a safe area, or let's just return a simple container for now to make sure it's working perfectly, which is gonna have a child of text. So we can just type in login screen. I want to have a decoration of box decoration. So let's make sure everything is closed perfectly. So the first one is going to be color, which is colors.red. So I just want it to have a reddish color at the background and then a text of login screen. So whenever you are done putting down your container, you have to actually close that from here. So that should save us from any stress. So we forgot to add the login state right here. And if you want to make use of that login file inside our main.dat file, we just come here and call the login class itself. And then we scroll up right here, we have to import that. But if you notice here, we are not importing it from the Flutter package or from the Flutter dependencies. We are importing it from our folder project, from our project folder, which means you have to specify the package name as our project folder. Then you refer to the screens folder, which we created the file on, and then the login.dat, which is the main file. So let's kind of save. I think we should also add something like a const. You kind of get later recommendation on Visual Studio Code. So we can add something like a const here, and then we can try to refresh. So right here you could see the component actually got imported and included in our application. So you can see we also have that reddish background. So that's not how I want the application to look like. So I'm just giving you the very basic things you can do with Flutter, which is kind of pretty cool. If you observe closely in our login screen, you can see the edges are touched together with the text. So in order to give a spacing from the edges, we can add something called the padding right here. So before we include the text, we can add a padding. And that padding, we can take this text and add it as a child. Then padding is going to accept a padding key as well. So with the help of edge insert dot only, so if we want to give only the top padding, we can just specify that top padding. Or let's say we want to give as well the right, you can specify that right. And bottom, let me break this down. Bottom 10.0, and which other one am I losing? Missing, I mean. So we have the left as well. So I think it's more best than that you break it down so that you can see it clearly. So that's how we can add a padding. And I want this text to have its style of text style. Then we have a color of colors.white. One thing we can also do is to make sure we have a const keyword here. And let's save and refresh this time around. I think that's because we didn't add a comma right here, and I don't think we need this const right here because we are making use of a const above there. Let's save that, and this time around we do not get any error. So our application refreshes and we get that nice screen. So we get this nice text login screen, and also you can see we have padding on the edges. Let's go on to add something called a button. So let's say I want to add a button beneath this text, beneath this login text. So I just want to reduce the font size of this text, which is too much. Okay guys, let's do it this way. So instead of us to have only the text here, we can add a container. Okay, so something like instead of us to add a container, why don't we add a column so that we can add like multiple widgets, which is gonna have a children. So beneath here, I'm gonna add a button. So the way we can add a button is to use the text button. Okay, this is not bad as well. We can use a text button, and I think I forgot to add a const here. Also, we can add a const here as well. So inside this text button, we're gonna have to give it a background color. So let me say a background color of colors.black, and we can also give it some padding in order to have a little bit of spacing at the edges of the text. So we can use edge inserts dot only. Let's say let's just use dot all. I think that would be much preferable. And each text button is gonna have a style from. So I think I kind of forgot to add this inside a text button dot style from. So inside this parentheses, we can add all this, which is not difficult. So we can add all these at the style from, and then beneath here we can add the unpressed. So this is like for us to notice the call to actions, and as well we can add a child widget. So our child is gonna be a text child. So I'm just gonna add a text child. So this is button. So inside here, whenever we click on anything, we can as well go ahead and print clicked. So what I can simply do is to copy this text style and paste that right here. So let me just break this down and paste it. So I want this one to have a color.white, which is not bad for a background color of black. So up here, I want to clear this const right here. We don't need that. So right in front of these separate widgets, I just want to add a const there, and also a const here. I don't think this, we have to add something like that. So with the Flutter conventional way of doing things, a lot of things has changed. So I don't think I need this here, but I think it's necessary here as well as necessary right here. And we can go ahead and save and refresh to see the effect of what we've done. So over there, you could see we have a button, and we kind of have a padding around the button. So if you want to space this down, if you want this to be pushed down, it's very simple. What you can do is to come here, you can use something called a sized box. So let's say something like a sized size, but it's just similar to container, but it's kind of you can apply a decoration to it. So you can give it a height of, let's say, 20.0. So I hope I typed things correctly. So let's save and refresh. So right now you could see we have something like a spacing between the text and also the button. So size bars are like containers, but you can't add a decoration to it. So one more thing is, if you don't want to make use of size bars to be given something like a margin to your widget, you can wrap the widget in a margin. So let's say regarding this text, what you can do is to add a margin widget. So sorry guys, I kind of forgot that it's not like margin widget, but you can use size bars to always give something like a margin to your spacing, which is not really bad as well. So the most conventional way of doing this is to use padding. So if you're not gonna use padding, you can use a size bars to do it. So I think I've shown you the very basic of using Flutter, and I think also it's necessary for us to go over to working on our application. So guys, if you've come this far, do not forget to hit the like button as well as the subscribe button, and let's proceed to work on our application. In this section, I'm going to show you the dependencies we are going to be using for this tutorial to build a full stack registration application with Flutter. So the first thing we are going to do is to add the HTTP for making a request, the Firebase call for Firebase, the Redux call as well for state management. So if you're working on a large scale application, it's always advisable to use something like a state management, and we are using a Redux for that. And then we also have the Flutter Redux in order to connect Redux with Flutter. Then we're going to be using Firebase auth to help us process the registration, like signing up a user with the email address and also the password. The Cloud Firestore is going to be responsible for storing, let's say we want to store the user details in our database on Firebase. So that's why we are using Cloud Firestore. And if you want to make use of Firestore effectively, you must add a Firebase database. So that's just what we're going to be using. So Flutter Toast, it's here, something like you want to display a warning toast message, but we're not going to be using that in this tutorial, but I just have to leave it there for you to know how to add dependencies. And lastly, we also have the UUID. So the UUID is like a random user ID generator, which can generate a random code for us to store in our database. So that's just the dependencies that we're going to be using in this tutorial. The next thing we have to do is to create a Firebase cluster, and the way we can do that is to come over to firebase.google.com, and then we can just click on get started. So we can actually create a new project. If you've not created a project before, you probably will see something like create a new project. So I'm just going to create a new project for our tutorial, and I'm going to name that Firebase auth. So you can just click on confirm and continue. So if you want to enable Google Analytics, like track the project usage, you can enable that. I'm just going to click on continue to next. And it's going to request that we select an account. So I'm just going to select my default Firebase account, which is for the email address I'm using, and click on create project. Once that is done, you're going to see your new project is ready, and just click on continue. So in order for us to use Firebase project on Flutter application, we have to connect that. So for us to connect that, I'm going to click on web. So if you're using, let's say if you're working on iOS app, you have to click on Apple. If you're working on Android app, you have to click on Android. But for the web, we're just going to click on the web. I'm just going to give this a nickname. So let's say app 1. And then I can click on register app. And it's going to put us through some steps on how we can actually use Firebase on any, let's say, maybe we are using let's say Express.js or anything, or we can actually use script tag if we don't have time for that. We can use a script tag to inject that into our HTML body. Then for the npm, you just have to run npm install if you're using that. So I'm just going to click on go to console. In our console here, we get to see the Firebase database, Firestore database, also the real-time database. So Firestore database kind of gives us a very good edge to use, let's say, some clusters or collections to store our user details or any other details we want to store. So authentication has to do with like user authentication, and also we do have sign-in method. So we also have to enable that by clicking on get started. We do have some sign-in methods like signing in with email address or signing in with Google or Twitter or Facebook. So you can see the options right here. So in this tutorial, we are not going to work with any other one except for the email and password. If you want to work with the phone, you can go ahead and click on work with the phone. So for now, I'm going to click on email and password, and it's going to enable email. And I don't want the email link, like sending an email to our email address. I don't want that. So I'm just going to click on save. So we have that enabled. So if we have started using that, we kind of get the usage analytics over here. So for the Firestore database, we also have to create a database. So I'm just going to click on create database, and I want this to be on a test mode. So this is not like an in-depth Firebase tutorial. I'm not going to go through some couple of restriction or how to restrict data and also data flow within your application. So this is just to show you how we can set up a Firebase, then connect that to our Flutter application, and then we can proceed with our project. So this has created a collection spot for us in order to store like collections of data in our application, in our Firebase application. So we are not going to be working with a real-time database. Of course, there are more to it, but it's also advisable that you just create that. So Firebase and Firestore are two different things. Like I said, I don't want to explain that, but I think with the way we are doing this, you should have an understanding of how to use it. So if you want to create that Firebase database or real-time database, you can still go ahead and create it. So if you notice right here, we do have a storage, but we are not going to be storing files. Let's say you want to store a file in your Firebase application. You can go ahead and store that file and make use of that file through your application, but we are not going to do that. So back in the authentication or back in our Firebase projects, let's say I'm going to click on Firebase auth. So right here, we want to connect our Flutter application to the Firebase. So let's click on the settings. So the settings right here is not actually displaying the Flutter settings, or you can actually use this code in your Flutter application. So we are going to show you how. I'm going to show you how. You notice we added these at dev dependencies, which is pretty wrong. We can just come over here and add it to our Flutter dependencies. So that's probably what we should do. I kind of got that wrong in the first place. And also, let's not forget to add the Flutter SDK on our dev dependencies. So that's it. So this time around, we can just use the Flutter pub get, and it's going to grab all the dependencies that we have there and install them for us. So we kind of got an error on line 40, and that's because right here. So this has to be this way, not like pushed inside. And let's try to Flutter pub get. Let's try to run that again. And because we got it right, you could see we are running Flutter pub get and Flutter auth, which is our application name, and it's going to grab all the necessary dependencies for us. So right now we have all the dependencies installed. And let's say we don't want to add dependency this way. We don't want to like add them manually, because it's not always advisable to add them manually. It's always advisable you install them, which is going to grab the compatible version for your application and also install you the latest version. And right now we have all our dependencies installed for us. In order to use Firebase on our Flutter application, we have to use what is called the Flutter widget binding. So the Flutter widget binding binds the framework to our Flutter engine so that we don't repeat like initializing the framework over and over again. So this is very cool, because let's say you want to use the Firebase framework on your Flutter application. You can't use that because it's not yet binded to your Flutter engine. So the way we can do that is very simple. Let's come over to our application. The first thing first is to make sure we have the Firebae core imported. So for us to achieve that operation in our Flutter application, we have to add a feature here. So why we are adding a feature is because you want to make this an async function in order to help us to catch error in case we do have an error, or return a value in case you want to return a value. Of course, the default value we are going to be returning is going to be this widget that we are calling here. But any other error is going to like pause the application, return that error, and display it for us before it proceeds. So right here, I'm going to use future, and I'm going to add an async right here. So I'm gonna try to bind the widget. So we have the try catch, we have the catch, and usually this is error, and then we can break that down. So if we have any error, we just want to print that error. So let's say print error. So if you're using Visual Studio Code, you kind of get your linter giving you a warning sign that this is not a rightful way to do it. So you can decide to wrap this in something like kdebug. So it's provided by Flutter by default. And inside of here, we're gonna use the widget. Let me just grab that. So widget Flutter binding dot. So we have to use ensure initialized. So this helps us to use our Firebase framework in our Flutter application. And then we now have to connect our Firebase. So let's kind of give this a try to make sure that everything works perfectly. And as you can see, it's working perfectly. So what I can do next right here is to connect our application. So we are done with the binding and our application is still working perfectly. So what we are going to do next is to use the Firebase. Let's use the await. So we have the Firebase.initialize app. So right here, we're going to pass the Google JSON settings provided for us for our connection. So these settings right here is exactly what we're going to do. So just click on config and grab everything here. I'm going to come down here and paste that. So if you really don't understand initialize app of Firebase, it's very simple. I'm going to show you how you can check more about that. So I think I googled something. So initializes default Firebase instance using the string resource values populated from the Google JSON file. So another simple explanation there, it also initializes Firebase analytics for the current process. So if you enable the Firebase analytics, the Firebase analytics, I wanted to say Flutter. So inside our application right here, we don't need all this. We don't need the const because I told you that's for JavaScript actually. We can actually use it for Flutter, but doing it here is not also bad. So the little things we are changing, first we are going to add options and then we can add a const of Firebase options. So Firebase options doesn't accept a curly brace, it accepts parentheses, and then we can pass down the settings and right here remove that invited commas there. So this is how we can actually connect our Firebase app to our Flutter application. If everything goes perfectly, we shouldn't get an error, so we just return this. I also return this, but in case we do have an error, we just go ahead and print out that error in our console. And I guess if you must have followed, you should realize I wrote Firebae, so this is Firebase options, not Firebase options. So right away it got restarted and everything should be working perfectly. Now that you are done connecting our Firebase, the next thing for us to connect is the Redux. So we are going to do that firstly. So for Redux, we are going to create a store folder inside our lib folder. So I'm going to create a store folder. And inside that store folder, we're going to create another folder called actions. I also like creating a reducer folder, but in this case, I'm working with Flutter. I can just create one reducer file. So I'm just going to create a reducer file right here. And then inside these actions, we are going to create 3 actions that we are going to need for this tutorial. So the first one is the since we are working with the auth actions, so let's just create one. So I kind of forgot that I'm just focusing on one project. I kind of have like 3 projects to work on regarding a tutorial on Flutter, but since we are starting off with this one, it's not bad. So this is how we can actually create store. Then inside the actions, we have to create one more file called types.dat. So let's start off from the reducer file. So in the reducer file, I'm going to create a class called app state, and this app state is going to be our default state because we are going to use this state throughout our application. So Flutter is a very good state management for, let's say, large scale application. You want to access the state from any part of your application So I think you should use Flutter, or you can use the Flutter kit as well. I mean the Redux, not the Flutter. So we have a default, let's say an initial state of auth type that's gonna help us to switch between login and register. So we also have a string of error. So we have string of error message. Then we're gonna have a list. Okay, let me just get rid of this for now. So let me not do that. So we are gonna like initialize our app state, and we have to make sure that all these are provided by default. So these are the default initial state values. So guys, pardon my voice for being low. So we also have, let me just get rid of this one. So whenever we want to replace our initial state values, we use the app state, and then we provide the copy with function. Then we have the auth type and error message for now. And then inside here, we're gonna return an app state. So we have the auth type is gonna be the auth type coming from our initial state, or sorry, the new auth type coming from wherever we dispatch the action from. Then we return the old one, which is the initial state values. So by default, this is gonna throw you an error. So make sure you have the Flutter imported, and also I'm gonna import Redux. So we have to import that from our package manager. Then we have the redux/redux.dat. So that will actually add the Redux. So in our reducer, we are gonna still be making use of types. So I'm just gonna import that. We are gonna quickly create our types. So that's from the actions folder, and then we have the types.dat. Then make sure you do add invited commas there. And inside our type.dat, I'm gonna create, let's just start off with enum for now. So this enum is what we're gonna be using for the switching. So I'm just gonna call it enum type of, we have switch auth type. Then for the error, so let's just create one action for updating our error. So let's say error update, and we're gonna call this a class of update error action. This is gonna accept a final dynamic error. So this is just like a string that we're gonna pass to the error. So we have to grab that. Let's say we want to display that error in our reducer. We have to use this getter to access that error. Then we want to update error action. So this dot error. So this the constructor, which is going to automatically set the error to this. But whenever we want to get that error outside of this class, we use this string get error to access that. So that's how we're going to be accessing the error inside our reducer in order to update or do anything else whenever we dispatch from our components or from our widgets. Let's proceed to connect that in our main.dat file. So inside this main.dat file, I want to import some Redux dependencies. So let's say Redux core. Let me close this down. So I'm going to import first the package redux/redux.dat. So let me quickly import others. So these are the necessary imports that we need for our Redux. So we have the Redux, Flutter Redux, which will help us to connect our Flutter application to our Redux application, and Redux Dunk, which will help us to use multiple middlewares. So right now, let's proceed to create a store. So let's say create Redux store. So we have a final store, and this store is gonna take in the store that is coming from our Redux. And for a store, we are gonna give it a type of app state, and then which is going to accept. So in a store, we have to pass the reducers. So we have to import that reducers file as well. then we have to set our initial state. So our initial state is our app state, which is going to accept the op types false. Then we have the error message, which is also an empty string. So that's how we can do that. And this is not invited command. So right here we also have to pass a middleware, so we can pass the, let's say, the thunk middleware. So if you're coming from React.js, you should be familiar with these lines of code. So we have the reducer file imported here, so just make sure you do that. And if you can notice here, we have a reducer. You probably might be getting an error on your linter, so that's because we probably did not combine the reducer. So inside this file, I'm going to call this a final reducers, which is going to combine reducers. So our our combined reducer is going to accept an alt reducer. So we can pass multiple reducers right here. So I will just go ahead and create an app state of alt reducer. So why we are giving this a type of app state, that's probably because we are going to return a data type of this class we created at the top, which is the app state. So our alt reducer is going to accept the initial state, which is the app state, and the dynamic of action. So this action is kind of dynamic. If you're coming from React.js, you probably know that Redux returns a type of action. A reducer takes a state and also an action. So this action, we have type and payload. So I'm just gonna return a state right here. So let's say we want to do some logic or some things, we can then use if action is for Flutter, but we are still coming to that. So let's probably go ahead and refresh, and if everything is done perfectly, it should not give us an error. So we have an error on combined reducers. Let's fix that. That's because we didn't add an S here. So always make sure your spellings are okay. And it got restarted perfectly without any error this time around. So back in our main.dat file, we have to pass the store to our my app. So right here, I'm going to pass this store to the my app widget. Then in order for us to use that, we have to make sure that the stateless widget recognizes that. So we have to use the required, and then we have this .store. So right here, we have to add the state, which is going to take a final store of type of app state, and then we have the store. So the next thing for us to use is to use the store provider to make sure that the app state is now provided around our application. So if you try to save that, you probably should get an error. That's because right here we are no longer using the const here. We should get rid of that. So the next thing is to use the store provider, which is very simple. Before we return this material app, we have to return a store provider. So this store provider is gonna accept two things. So we have the store, which is the store we provided, and also we have the child. So the child is gonna be this material widget right here. So just go ahead and arrange that, and then we come down here and close that parenthesis. So that's why we actually need to import the Flutter Redux right here to help us connect our Redux store to our Flutter application. So guys, we are done connecting that, and right here I think I should add the const here because they shouldn't just be that way. So let's go ahead and refresh, and I think we shouldn't get a single error, and also we should have our state around our application, and everything is working perfectly. And if we check in the browser, we just have to restart that, so you could see our application is working perfectly. Let's go on and create our user with Firebase. First of all, I'm going to add a try-catch block. Secondly, I'm going to make reference to the Firebase auth.instance, and we just want to use the create user with email and password, which is going to take in the email of email and password of password. Then it's going to return the user credentials for us. So this is going to be a parenthesis. So we have the user credentials. So if you can recall from the Firebase auth, authentication, we just have whenever user is created, we are just going to have the username and also the email. So these are actually sign-in methods you can also use in your application. You can go ahead and add Google or Facebook, anyone you want, but in this tutorial we are just using the username, email and password. So right here is going to actually create that username with just the email and password. What if, let's say, we have like username, we want to store the email in a separate field? We can then use what is called a collection. So in order to do that, we have to create a collection reference. So create a user collection. So we use the user collection reference. This is a type of collection reference and users. So we just want to use the Firebase. This time around, we are going to use the Firestore dot instance of the Firestore dot collection. So you can actually use Firebase if you still want, but this is not bad. So the next thing we have to do is to store user and redirect. Store user and redirect. So it's gonna be users dot. So we have to add a user, and then we're gonna add the full name, which is the name. We're gonna add a key of auth ID. So the user credential help us to return an ID, and we just wanna use the user credentials .user.uid, and then lastly we have the email, which is going to use the user credentials .user.email. So if we store that user perfectly, we just gonna have a callback, and this callback is gonna have a value. So we just wanna like clear any error in our update error action. So we have to dispatch update error action. One more thing we want to do is to redirect. Doing that, we use the navigator.push replacements. So we have replacements, and then we can pass in the context, and then we can navigate using the material. Let me break this down so we can see clearly. So we have the material page routes, then we pass in the builder, which also accepts the context, and then we specify the widgets that we want to navigate to. So let's not forget to close them properly, and I think we just have to copy this so that we don't have a typo in the user credentials. And lastly, also don't forget to change this to user. And one more thing we forgot to import was the Firebase auth in order for us to use the Firebase. So we can use the it's called the Firebase auth / Firebase auth.dat. For the login, we are not going to need the name. What we just need is the email and the password. Inside this try block, we just have to use the user credentials. So it's a type from Firebase, so we just assign the user credential. So make sure this is typed correctly. So we use an await, and we make reference to Firebase auth.instance. So right here we have sign in with email and password. So right here we specify the email as well, we provide the password. So that's how we just simply want to do that. So sorry for that, kind of took us up because of my code editor. So we just want to like catch custom error. So right here, if you notice, I'm not doing anything, so we can actually go ahead and print something like logged in. I'm not like redirecting or replacing any route because we are not like working on something else. We just want to be able to register a user and log in, so we can catch in some custom error using Firebase auth exception. So we have to catch an error. So we can say if e.code is equals to, let's say, user not found. We just want to let's quickly grab this line of code. So we just want to return a dispatch, then we can let's say no user found. Else if e.code is equals to let's say a wrong password, we also want to dispatch or return a dispatch of let's say wrong password, wrong credentials. So we don't just say wrong password, we can say wrong credentials for this user. In this section, we are going to be implementing the logics that we've built so far or we've typed down so far into our application. So let's go over to our main.dat file. Instead of us to now use the login screen right here, the login widget directly, we are going to use what is called routes. So that will probably make me to clear everything here. And above this home, I'm going to put down the routes key. The routes key is going to accept the name of the route. So the first one is going to be called authentication. So let's just call this one authentication for now. And then we can get the build context and grab that. So this the type, this context, and then we can now specify the widget we want to display. I don't want to display the login widget directly. I want to display another widget which we are going to create right now. Inside the screens folder, I'm going to create a file called the auth logic, not the screen logic. And for me to make use of that widget inside of this main.dat, I have to make sure that every class is created. So I'm just going to call this a class of auth logic, and as usual, it's going to extend the stateful widget. And I'm going to close that, and I'm going to create the state of auth logic. So that is not login, this is logic. And it's going to extend the state, and we're going to be making use of the state. Sorry for that. Extend the state of auth logic. We're going to pass in the constructor right here, which is the auth logic, and we have the key, and then we have the super key of key. Then we're going to have an override of, so we're going to bring in the auth logic right here, and then we're going to create state of auth logic. So do not forget to put the parentheses in front of this. Lastly, inside the auth logic state itself, we're going to override the build. Sorry for that, guys. So we're going to call this a widget of build, and then we have the build context of context. Then right here, we just want to return a scaffold. I think you can also add a safe area, but let's just use a scaffold for now. We don't actually need a safe area here. And then for the body, I'm just gonna put a center widget with a child of text. So I think it should be this way. Then we have these as, let's call it the auth logic screen. One more thing, do not forget to close it properly so that we don't get any error. Let's go ahead and close all these other components that we don't need for now, or files that we don't need for now. So back inside this main.dat file, to make use of that auth logic, we can come up here. So let me just call these screens. So we have right here Flutter auth, and then we can go over to the screens folder, and then we can get in the auth logic.dat file. And down here where we have this arrow, I will just put down a cons of auth logic. I don't know why I keep typing auth login. So once we did this, Flutter is not going to recognize these routes because we have to specify a key of initial route inside the before the route. That's not inside the route. So we have initial route, then we can make a reference to a route called authentication. Let's go ahead and refresh our application right away. So you might get an error trying to do that. Let's remove one here, and because we don't have any other thing returned, I just want to add a const keyword in front of this safe area. So one more thing I forgot to do was I always close this way. So for now it's not needed right here. So that should probably make sure everything is working fine. So if our application is refreshed again and everything goes successfully, we should see this auth logic screen displayed for us. So this is where we're going to be handling the logic of switching between the registration screen or the registration widget and the login widget. And from there, we're going to make use of our state as well. Right away, you could see we get that auth logic screen at the middle. So let's go over to that component or the widgets. At this center, I'm going to clear this child and I'm going to put a child of stack. I'm going to put a child of container, not a stack for now. So this container is going to accept a decoration. So let's give it a box decoration. So we have color, and then I'm going to use a specific color. So to use a custom color in Flutter, you just have to use a color widget. Then you can put in 0sff. Then you can type down the color code you want to use. Then we're going to have a child. So I'm going to add a stack here. And this stack is going to have a clip behavior. So I don't want the stack to be displayed in some sections of the screen. I want this stack to like make use of all the whole screen. That's why I'm adding a clip behavior. I want to use a clip.none. Then we're going to have an alignment called alignment.top center. So I want this to be centered. Then inside a stack, we are going to have an array, a children with an array of value. So here we can add so many things like custom, let's say we want to add a text. So let's just say a text widget. So let's say this is logic. So right now you could see we get this is logic, and we can add so many stack. We can add so many things to the stack just like the way we do to column and or row. So that's how we can do that. So if you notice, our stack text does have a background color. I want the background color to be used in every screen. The way we can do that is to add it directly to this scaffold. So I'm going to reference a background color called const. Then we can make use of this same 0xFF7B43D. So this is F7. And we can add a comma. So the next thing we are going to do is to make use of our state. If you could recall, we added the state in our main.dat, and our application can access the state values of our Redux from any part of the application. So we added that right here, and then we use the store provider to make sure it's contained within our app. So it's like within anywhere section of our app, we can access anything inside the store. Inside this auth logic, what I'm going to do next is to get rid of these two things. I'm going to bring in first the Flutter Redux as well as the reducer. Inside here, we're going to make use of the store connector because we now have our Flutter Redux brought in. So the store connector takes in the app state, and then it's going to have a return type at the end. So this return type is the data we are going to be accessing from our store. So we are going to take the converter. So the converter takes in the store or returns the store actually, then we can have access to the type of the data that we return. So we have auth type. So if you can recall, the auth type is a Boolean value. And one good thing about the store connector, it's listening to event changes. So whenever we have something called on wheel change, it's gonna have access to the previous props and also the next prop. Then we're gonna have a builder. So if you can check very well, this is like a contain function. We can actually display something outside of it, so we have to like use this and listen to our state, then we can render a widget within that using the builder keyword. So we have the odd type, and inside here we can return a container. So I'm just going to quickly style that. And then for the child, we are going to have to use the ternary operator. So that's probably, if we have a false value, we should return a login widget, or else we should return a register widget. So if you can see here, we have something called the screen width and a screen height. So let me just quickly show you what I did there. When we scroll a little bit up here, inside these widgets, we're gonna add something called double. Then we can make reference to the screen width and also the screen height. So what this actually means is that we are making use of the device media query to actually get the specific screen width or screen height to render it perfectly for any device screen. So we have access to the size and then the width. So same thing we did for this. I don't want to type that again, so we can just copy that and then add an equal sign there. Then this is gonna be the height. Lastly, let's go ahead and import the let's say the screens. So the first one, I just want to import these ones as a package as well. So we can call this package Flutter Odds, and then we have the screens. So inside the screens, we are going to have access to, let's check right here, we have the login and also the register. So let me just close that. So we have /login.dat, and then we have /register.dat. So let's save. I think that should get rid of any remaining error because our components are working perfectly. Okay, we've not actually added anything except for the login. We added something like the dummy screen that we just saw. So except for the register, so we are gonna just do that quickly. And for the register, I've added this dummy widget template. So just go ahead and do that, and then we already have something for the login, and for the odd logic we also do have something. So right now we are able to display, I think by default it should display the login for us. So let's give that a refresh. Okay, by default we do have the register displayed for us. So I'm not going to stress much time on the designs again. I suggest that by now you should already know how to, or be familiar to Flutter design concept. I'm just going to paste something down here. So this is just a positioned box that is going to take in a size box and a container. Then we are just returning the name of the application. So if you notice here, we are just like taking this a little bit up from the original position. So that's just it. So if I refresh quickly, we're gonna see the effect, and we can see a very nice app name over there. So this is kind of telling us that our application is kind of making sense right now. So the next thing we are gonna do is to work on the design. The first one being the register. Let's go ahead and work on that. I'm gonna quickly open the login, the register file or the register widget. So I just made some couple necessary imports. I suggest that you do that as well. Then inside here, we're gonna get rid of this const, and we're gonna get rid of this text. We don't just want to display a text there. So I just want that to be clear. And the first thing we are gonna do is to add a widget. So I don't want to use this scaffold. I just want to return something called a single chart scroll view. So this, with the help of this single chart scroll view, let's say you have like multiple forms, and these forms, let's say on a device, it's kind of overlapping and it's not showing properly. So with the help of this single child scroll view, someone can be able to scroll up and down and type effectively on this input. And also whenever someone is focused on that input, it kind of pushes it up above the keyboard. So let's put a child there, and then which is gonna take a column. We have children. Inside here, I want to display state error messages. So we're gonna use the store connector. If you don't have the Flutter Redux imported, it's gonna give you an error. And also we have the reducer imported. So in this case, we are just accessing a string. So let me just quickly do that. So we have a state in a parenthesis, and then we're gonna have access to state. Sorry, this is store, not state. So we're gonna have access to store.state.error message. Then for the builder, we just want to have access to that error message, and then we can return a container. So I just want to decorate this faster, and that's what we get. So we added a padding and also a text. So the text takes in the text of the error message, and then we styled it. So in the beginning I showed you how to style the text, so that's why I didn't waste the time to do that. So we just added the style and then added the custom color with the custom color widgets. So beneath that, we're gonna have a text field. So I just want the text field to have a padding. So let me just go ahead and put that down faster. So we have a const of h insert only. So we have top of 10.0, a left of 80.0, and also a right of 80.0. So this one makes Flutter a little bit boring because of you type a lot of things, and you can't just keep things that you can reuse. So also we have a child inside this padding. I'm gonna give it a size box. So this size box is gonna have a width of 347.0. So you can also go ahead and give it your own custom width and height. So we have 57.0. Then we are gonna have a child which is going to take in the text field. And then for this text field, first we are gonna have an unchanged event. So unchanged event listener, which takes in a string of we are gonna call this email, and then we can use that email to do whatever we want to do. Secondly, I want all the text to be aligned. So text.align.center. Also, I want to style it, and the way we can style that is to reference the decoration, and then we can make use of what is called the impute decoration. So this is not a box decoration design. So this kind of accepts the border. So I'm gonna have access to the impute border dot none. So let me just quickly decorate that. So with that put down, so we have the impute decoration which takes in the border. So we kind of style the borders of the impute, and I don't want any border. That's why we use impute border dot none. Then we have a field of true. Then we also have a field color, and then so this field of true kind of gives the input a background color. Then we have the hint text. The hint text is gonna be let's say the text you are typing. So sorry, not the text you are typing, the text that displays there, like your full name or your name, your surname, all those kind of text. Then we give the hint text a style. So that's how we can do that. So if I go ahead and refresh right now, you see we get that input. So right now you could see when we type here, we are just getting a text being written down, but this text is not kind of really nice. So we want something that looks a little bit lighter than the background. The way we can do that is to use the style. So I'm just gonna style that faster. So we gave it a text style and then give it a custom font size, a color, and also a font weight. And lastly, I gave it a text capitalization. So we just want everything to be lower caps, not capitalized or large or upper caps. Without wasting much of our time, let me go ahead and add the input for other inbox. So you can just go ahead and repeat this. So this padding, you can just go ahead and copy it down and then change it to email address and also the password. Just for the password, we are just going to change an obscure text. Right away, we get this nice looking input. So for the password, you can see that we have something different. But for the email, I can say sam@gmail.com. So the text is now lighter than the background, which is very nice. So the way we achieved that obscure text on the password was just to come here. We just needed to put this to true. So I can just get rid of that comment. It's not needful. So that was just how we did it. Then the next thing we are going to do is to add a button. So the way we are going to do this button, it's going to be different from the way this one is. So we are going to use a container button. So we added a container, and inside that container we had a text button, but this container kind of gave it a fixed width and height. Then we added a text button, and then we gave it a style. And then this is the button that is going to be registering the user, or whenever we click on it, we achieve the onSubmit method that is going to dispatch to our state and also help us to dispatch to the back end. So let me just go ahead and refresh. So right now you could see we have this nice looking button here. So whenever I click on it, it's going to perform some action, call to action. So the next thing remaining is our ability to switch from this login screen, from this register screen to the login screen. So we are going to add it quickly. So back in our register widget, I just added a container and then give it a padding, imagine as well. And we have a row. So this text have an account and also login are two different things. So that's why I use the padding here and a text button here. So if you can check here, we have a row. I give it a main axis alignment to be centered so that the row is going to position everything horizontally centered. So we just give it a text and also a button. So right now application just refreshed and we can see the inputs showing nicely, and also you can notice we can scroll within that container, which is very nice. One more thing is that you notice we now have an account login. So if I click on this now, nothing happens. So for us to make sure that we render the login widget whenever we click on this, we have to make use of the switch or type. So what we are going to do is to come over right here. Since we have the store imported from the main, so that's the main reason why we have this main.dat file imported here, so that we can have access to the store. We can just quickly come here and say store.dispatch. We have to switch auth. So this is going to switch the auth for us. Why this switch auth is actually coming from the auth actions. So let's refresh and just click on that have an account. I'm going to click on login. So if I click on this, you could see immediately we just come over to the login screen. So right now nothing is working because we don't have anything for this button. We don't have any action being dispatched by this button, but you could see everything is working perfectly. And quickly let's go on and design the login screen. So the login screen is similar to the register screen, just that we don't have a name field. So let's just do that faster. So right here you could see we just have the email and also the password, and then we have the login screen. So right here we have don't have an account, sign up. When we click on this, it's going to render the register widget. So when we click on this also, it's going to register the login widget. Let's quickly go over the design code. So similar to what we did to register, we just added the store connector for getting error message. Then we have separate padding for the form fields, which is the input fields, and then a custom styling for each of them. Then that's just simply it. There's nothing much. Then at the end there, we just change the text from from have an account to don't have an account, and then same thing like dispatching action that's gonna switch the odds. In this section, we are gonna be making use of the form fields data and storing that into our Firebase container. So the way we can do that is to come over to this register state, and I'm gonna create default state values. So we're gonna call this full name. We're gonna have a string as well of email, and then we're gonna have a string of password. So the way we can assign that is to come inside each of the unchanged right here. So let's say if email is not equals to empty, we want to assign the state email to the email, but we have to use this, we have to wrap that inside the set state, and this is a callback. We can even do it this way, so there's no need to add an arrow function, which is not bad. So, and I think this has to do with the name, so let's make sure that this is the first one that has to do with the name. So that's how we can do that. Let's scroll down and do for the email. So this is where the email is. So always make sure that the datas are not empty. So we have to make sure that something is specified here. Let's say if it's not empty, we just want to set state. So we have this has to do with the email this time around. So we have that done, and one more setup we need is for the password. So if the password is not equals to, I think this is, yeah, this is much more correct. So we have the password equal to the password. So that's a password, not like passwords. So I think I made a mistake here. I also have to get rid of one here. So whenever we are making a typing, or let's say whenever we are typing something inside this form, let's say you want to type your real name. Let's say I put down both queues there, both queues real name. It's going to automatically take in what is here and assign that into the state value of full name or name over here. So it's gonna do that. I think this is full name, not just name. So this is full name, not just a name. Also make sure you fix all the errors, because for my linter I think I didn't add all these invited commas. So just go ahead and make sure you add them. So in order for us to send that data to our database or our Firebase, we have to scroll down here where the submit button is, and then inside of here I'm gonna use the dispatch. So I'm just gonna call the register function. So if you can recall, we do have the register function from the auth actions, which is going to take in, I don't think I passed the store, but I think I passed the name. So we have the full name, the email as the email address, and then we have the password as the password. Also, we do have the context as the context to help us to render another widget or redirect or replace the current routes totally. So let's save that and have a quick preview of what you've been doing. So if that gives you an error, I think just come down here and close the dispatch. So that should get rid of that error. This time around, let's try to refresh. So let's go ahead and make sure that our user will be able to register using our login screen or login widget. And I'm going to give it a first user at email.com. And I'm just going to type a random password and hit register. So if this user registers successfully, we should definitely see this widget render us a login widget, which is the other login widget. Or because we are not getting anything, let's kind of quickly check in our Firebase database. I'm going to click on authentication, Actually, the user got registered, but something is wrong in such a way that we are not able to render the login widget. So let's kind of check. So what I think is wrong is that I have a lot of return here, which I do not actually want. So I'm just gonna get rid of this, and that's basically it. And right here, this is nice. I just want to add, let's say I want to add a comma right here, and then I can say store.dispatch. Let's update the error action first and set that to an empty string. Okay guys, I forgot to save the code. So once I saved the code on my IDE, I was able to like run it perfectly. And also I removed this store.dispatch from this function because it's here. I just called it directly. It's on the same file. I just called it directly and it's worked perfectly. So if there was any existing error, we did get that out before we now switch to the login screen. So that's how we can actually register user. So let's say I wanna try out first user again, unless I don't have first user email yet registered. So I have first user at gmail.com and I'm just gonna register that. So it brings me to the login screen to log me in. So let me just go ahead and try to register that first user again. I just want us to see how the error will look like. So we have gmail.com and then we have Samuel, and then when I click on it, definitely we should get an error. So it's not actually proceeding because we do have that user, we do have an error. So we are not getting an error. That's probably because we are not catching an error. Let's come over here and just add something called catch error. So with the help of catch error, we are able to catch any single error from this adding of users, and then we just dispatch that message to our update error action with converting it to a string. So that's how we can actually do that. So let me just go ahead and refresh. So don't mind this because I was kind of testing things out. And inside our register file, we don't want it in such a way that whenever a user is logged in, the user will be able to like come over to the register widget or click on sign up, and the register widget will be presented to the user. So to fix that, let's fix that before we go ahead and test. I added 2 lines of code here. So the first line disables the persistent on web platforms. So by default, Firebase kind of stores something like a token and then uses that token to verify that user if a user is actually actively logged in, or the section of that user is active. So the user is gonna be allowed into the application. So in this instance, I don't want the persistence to be there. I just want it out. Secondly, we just want to check if a user is logged in. So let's say you just logged in on the login widget and you mistakenly clicked on sign up. We don't want the user to be on the sign up. We want the user to be returned back to another screen. So of course, I'm just like switching back with the user to the login screen, but that doesn't mean like it's supposed to be that way. This is supposed to have something like redirecting a user to the dashboard. Let's go ahead and refresh that again. And we are going to allow that. And one more thing I forgot to do was to show you some codes in the login. So the only thing I did in the login was I cleared any error. Let's say we logged in perfectly, so we just have to like clear any error in the state, and then we just print out logged in. So if you also want to redirect, you can use the context coming from here and redirect or replace the route. So let's go over to our application, and I'm gonna try to register a user that already exists. I'm gonna register the first user. So we have the first user at gmail.com, and I'm gonna put the password and register this user. So we get the error that says the email address of this user is already is already used by another account. So if we try to register, let's say let me just say user 2. let me just say second user, and for this one I can say second user. So when we register that, it's gonna clear any error message there and then bring us back to the login screen. So that was how it was supposed to work, because we are not supposed to stay in the register screen, just like I explained earlier. So I'm going to log in with, let's say, firstuser@gmail.com, and I'm going to put something like a wrong password. When I hit login, you see we get a error message of wrong password or wrong credentials for this user. So that shows us that our application is working fine. And let's say I log in with a good password and a good email address. It's going to log us in by clearing off the error message, and also in our console we are going to get this text logged in. So that's just simply it. So while I was testing things out, you could see there's a lot of users I was trying to register. So I can just go ahead and get rid of all these users. So just go ahead and get rid of any unnecessary user you have there. And if you can notice here, whenever a user is registered, we store the details of that user in a separate collection of users. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. Please do make sure you leave the comment on the comment section, and also give me some suggestions that you think that is very necessary for my videos. And next time we're going to make something that looks very nice. So thank you once more. Make sure you hit that like button and also the subscribe button.